All right, what's going on, my good people? I thought I'd pop in here real quick for a little fast tutorial. I had a young brother who's been asking a few questions about handling RAW files. So as you know, if you're experimenting with photography, there are a number of different ways you can go about handling the RAW files from your camera. And shooting RAW is your best option for getting the best possible outcome from the images that you're capturing. It just gives you so much more flexibility when it comes time to do your post work. So I have two different applications that I occasionally use for processing RAW files. Lightroom being one and Capture One being, the preferred that I use the most. So first I'll start off in Capture One to show you guys exactly what my little workflow in Capture One is like. So for instance, if I'm shooting in studio or on location or working on product photography or something like that, I'm going to be shooting tethered. So that gives me the advantage of being able to set my white balance and get everything set up here in Capture One and capture live. So that means I get a live image of whatever I'm capturing on my camera going straight to my computer. Now, in some situations, or in most situations, that's not going to be the case for you. If you're out shooting a wedding or a corporate event or whatever it is, portraits on location, you're going to be shooting on your camera. So one of the most important things you can do during the shoot is to try and get a good white balance. Invest in a gray card. You can go over to Amazon, and let's just pop over here to Amazon real quick. And of course it didn't go straight to Amazon, but that's okay. And what we're looking for is a photo gray card. Now there's a number of different versions you can buy. You can get the ones, I actually like these. These are about $7. It gives you a gray, a white, and a black card that goes on a little lanyard, and you can put that around your neck. Then that way you can have your talent or whomever it is hold it, or if you're at a corporate event, you can get at least one shot with one of these cards in the shot so that you'll be able to white balance later on. The other option is going to be something like one of these targets. So these are going to be about $20, and you can purchase these. They come with a gray on the front, and then they're usually white on the back. And they'll come in a little pouch that you can carry them in. You can just fold it up, throw it in your camera bag, no problem, okay? So if you had to choose between the two, I would always recommend at least getting the minimum, which would be one of these little plastic cards, which will give you your 50% gray or white or black or whatever. Now, there are other ways to ensure your white balance, and there's some devices that you can place in front of your lenses that work, as well as any of you who still have some of the Gary Fong flash modifiers. That little cap that goes over the flash, if you put that over your lens, pointing it in the direction that you're going to be firing, you can actually get a white balance from that as well. So that's another option for you. But you can find, like I said, something really, really affordable on Amazon to get you started as far as getting your white balance right. Okay, so let's assume that you got your white balance, everything else is good, you're capturing RAW. So then you're going to get back home or wherever you're going to be working from, and you're going to import all of your images. So 90% of the time when your images come in, they will not be exactly what you want. So you're going to have to go in and you're going to do some slight adjustments, whether it's going to be with the exposure, the white balance, things like that. Now, a trick that works out pretty well for most is that the human eye is a good target for white balance, unless there's some really, really bizarre color cast going on or something like that. So what I mean by that is you can sample from the eye of the individual. So here's our white balance sampler. Now, of course, I could just go here and I could choose flash because flashes were used, and it should give me somewhat of an accurate white balance. But if you see here in this image, it seems very, very warm. And that has to do with what the original white balance was set at in the camera. So the other option, if you're shooting under natural light, you can do daylight, shade, tungsten, white fluorescent. So all of these presets are here, or you can just, leave it as shot. So if you leave it as shot, then what you can do is you can use your little picker, and this is the same in Lightroom as it is here in Capture One, and you should be able to sample just from her eye, the white in her eye, and that's going to give you a very accurate starting white balance. Now, as you see right here, this white balance is now at 5,065. So we're going to go to the image just right next to it, and this one is at 5329. So we're going to do basically the same thing. Going to get a reading there. And that one's at 5171. So they're pretty close, I mean, it's not that far off, but it's close enough. So once you have your images here in Capture One, you can go through your normal routine. You can adjust your exposure. Now, what I have a tendency to do more in Capture One, instead of adjusting the exposure, I adjust the brightness. But let's say you're old school, you want to adjust the exposure, then you still want to come in here and play with the contrast a little bit, whether you want to bring it way down or up. It just depends on what it is, the end result of your images that you're looking for. But brightness will do something similar without blowing out your image so much. So you don't lose a lot of the details in the lighter areas. So you could keep the exposure down a little bit and then still get a well-lit image if you're just using your brightness. And of course, you can adjust your saturation. You have your dynamic ranges here where you can adjust, for your highlight, shadows, white balance. Your white and your black. So if you hold down Option, you can slide and you can find the perfect white point in your image to see when it's clipping, or you can just turn on your exposure meter, which is your exposure warning here, and it shows you where everything is clipping. Now, the reason why this image is clipping is because there's a light directly behind her pointed at a white background. So that's about where that light is hitting. So if we wanted to adjust for that, we could then come in here and just bring the exposure down until that's completely gone. And then we could still bring the brightness up just a little bit, not too much. Then you have your clarity and your saturation. You can, your structure, and that's going to do more with detail in your detailed areas in the face, and if it was an object or something like that. So let's say if we go in here and we zoom in real close, and if I started messing with the clarity, I can bring a lot of detail into her face. Or structure will do basically the same thing. It brings a lot of detail into the image. If you see how much her skin pops there and the hair, so it just really brings a lot of contrast into the image. But that might be something that you need, for a specific image that you're working on. Then you also have dehaze. These are things that are available here in Capture One. You have your levels, where you can come in and adjust your levels. So if you want to bring that white point in, and then your black point in, and then you can adjust from the middle, from the midtones, for your brightness, and you can adjust your image accordingly. So then what is next? We have our curves. So basically with your curves, if you're not familiar with curves, you have most people think about curves from an S curve, where they're lowering the dark areas and lightening the highlights in the light area to get somewhat of an effect like this. I mean, that works in most situations. I use curves quite a bit, but usually I use them in Photoshop. So you also have a vignette in here. So I mean, everything is here as far as correcting your image when it comes to working with raw images, as well as you have a number of different presets that you can come in here and play with. So there's one specific that works really good for the skin tones, where you can actually sample the skin tone and then you can expand it and then soften or harmonize the skin tone right here in Capture One, which is a lot similar to, I'm not going to say it's similar to airbrushing or something like that, or even frequency separation, but it gives you a similar effect where what it tries to do is to harmonize all of the tones in the skin so that they become more unified. Let's see what else. That's pretty much the important things. I mean, like I said, there's other things in here. We spend hours looking at everything that you can do in Capture One. But let's jump over to Lightroom, and we'll see that a lot of the same presets are there. So let's go find a similar image. And usually in Lightroom, what I do here, starting out, the first thing I do is I check my white balance, because that's going to be the most important thing for you if you're dealing with raw images, because you don't want to go in and start adjusting colors and tones and all that kind of stuff, and your white balance isn't right. So the first thing I usually do is, like there's a white object, or I have a test shot, I will white balance off of that, and then I will sync all those images accordingly. So let's say if we go with the same method we did before, where we're going to sample from her eye, and we're going to get our white balance. That still seems a bit blue to me, so let's try sampling from the background. That's a little bit better. And then let's bring the exposure up just a little bit. And you have the same thing here. You have your clipping warnings, where you can look at your highlights and see where your images are clipping. So that's something you want to keep in mind if you're worried about, something blowing out. And then you have your contrast controls, highlight, shadows, also white and black. So again, as I said before, you can hold down Option and you can start pushing your whites until you start to see the white just kind of popping in. That's going to get you as close to a consistent white for a background or an object or something like that. And then you can do the same with your blacks. You can just start moving this until you just start slightly see the black peeking in, and then just stop. And that usually gives you a pretty good contrast. So another thing that I usually do in Lightroom is that I usually go down and I look for, here under lens corrections, I will enable the camera profile. So whatever camera this was shot with, I will enable that so that we'll know, for instance, the profile will be adjusted to the photo. So sometimes that'll correct barrel distortion. It can correct a number of different things, to a degree. But then you can always go further in the adjustments by just adjusting it here with these controls here at the bottom. Okay, so let's go to the last example of how to adjust your raw images. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to go Show in Finder, and I'm going to pick one of these raw images, say this one, and I'm going to open it in Photoshop. Well, it doesn't want to open from here, so let's see. Where did I save those? Okay, I know where they're at. So if we go over and find those images, and we're just going to open one of them in Photoshop. And what you'll find is that in Photoshop, and that's weird, it doesn't really give me an option for Photoshop other than Other, where I would have to choose it. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to drag it to Photoshop. So I'm going to bring it down here. Okay, so now what's going to happen is your image is going to open in Camera Raw. Camera Raw in a lot of ways is a lot like Lightroom. So you have a lot of the same things here. You can adjust your white balance. You can adjust your exposure, your contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, all of those things are here for you. You have your texture, you have clarity, you have your dehaze, you also have your vibrance and saturation, and then down here are some of the other same similar controls that you had inside of Lightroom. So if you go down here, we can still do our camera profile. We can do all of the same things that we did in Lightroom in Photoshop. So if you were going to be opening an image straight into Photoshop, you would have a lot of those same flexibilities. Now, if you're working like I am most of the time, where you're shooting multiple images, So, this is not going to be a good solution because, I mean, you can open multiple images in Camera Raw, but you don't want to open 500 images in Camera Raw or something like that. So the advantage to working with, either Lightroom or Capture One is that you can go in here and you can say, okay, I'm going to make all of my adjustments on this one image, whatever it's going to be. And then you can then select, shift and select whatever other images that are similar and just hit sync. And then that will sync all of those images. It'll bring up this little panel where you can determine how many of the things that you've done do you want it to pass on to the other images. You may just want it to pass on the white balance, or you may want it to pass on specific things that you've done, so you can select or deselect them, just based on whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But if you hit sync, then what's going to happen is all of the other images are now going to be synced. They're going to be very similar to the original image. So if you look at this one here, and if we jump over to one way down in the stack, it's going to have the same exposure, contrast, all of those same things are going to be available in all those images that we just adjusted. So any of these images we look at, they should look, for the most part, other than position of the model or something, they should look exactly the same. So that should not be a problem for you. Now I have my Lightroom, my Photoshop set up that whenever I open an image in Photoshop to edit, it will usually open it in Camera Raw. But if it's coming from Lightroom, that may not be the case for most of you, depending on how you have your Photoshop set up. Now, you don't need it to be set up in that way where it's going to reopen the image in Camera Raw, because most of your processes have already been done here in Lightroom, or if it's going to be done in Capture One. So then when you go into Photoshop, there's just your image, and you're ready to start working. Now, as you see here, this image came in as a 16-bit. And if you want to change, I have mine defaulted to 16-bit because I like working with the highest possible resolution for the images. But if for some reason you want to turn it back to an 8-bit image, you can just go here to mode and choose 8-bit or 32-bit or 16-bit or whatever it is that you're working with. But 16-bit is going to give you the best possible result image quality-wise. And then at this point, if for some reason you wanted to go to Camera Raw, you can still open this image in Camera Raw, and it'll open just the same as if it was just drug in. If you needed to make some adjustments, or you wanted to use some of the Camera Raw presets or something like that, because a lot of the same things that you have in Lightroom, those presets are going to be here in Camera Raw for you. So if you have a certain preset that you want to work with, and you want to gain access to it once you get it over to Photoshop for some reason, you can still always come back here and then further adjust or add those effects to your photos. So we're not going to do any of that, but it's there, it's available to you. So then usually once you've done whatever editing you're going to do on your photos, it's going to round trip it. It's going to send this image back to Lightroom after you save it. That's not the case if you save it as an 8-bit. So as long as it is still 16-bit, which is technically a TIFF, it'll go back to to Lightroom as however you set it. So we're just going to make this a black and white, really simple. So let's just make it a black and white. Let's just crush the reds a little bit, give it a little contrast, adjust the yellows. Reds and the yellows, that's your skin tone. And then we're just going to flatten it. And then File, Save. Not Save As, but Save. So then when we go back to Lightroom, we should see that image eventually load here in Lightroom. So that'll round trip back to Lightroom with your images if you want to use Lightroom as your final destination for your exporting of your images. And you have total flexibility when it comes to exporting your images from Lightroom, from Camera Raw, or from Capture One. But if you're exporting a lot of images, in some ways Lightroom is probably going to be your best solution. Now the similar commands are going to be available for Capture One, that if you have 200 images or two, you would be able to select those images and export them out. So if you go here to File, Export, here's where all of your presets are going to be. So here's where you can determine if it's going to be a JPEG, where the file is going to be saved, the quality of the image. If you have it set to a very high resolution, say for instance, like most of my images are 250 up to about 300 and something DPI, depending on which image, what I'm going to be using the image for, or what the client needs the image for. And then you can export them that way. Now, sometimes when I'm uploading images like to a storefront, for people to view the images before I do the final edits, then I'll come in here and what I'll do is I'll lower the resolution to something like 72 and then export all of the images after I've adjusted the white balance and all that kind of stuff. So then they can go in and pick the ones that they want based on the file number. Then that indicates to me which ones they want to do the complete editing on and stuff like that. So then I'll go in and do frequency separation and dodging and burning and all the other stuff that needs to be done to deliver the image. So hopefully, guys, this little quick live will help you someone out, and you'll understand, a little bit better how to work with Lightroom, with Capture One, as well as Camera Raw when it comes to working with your raw images. Now, there are other options. One of them is if you're not using any of the three softwares that we just, talked about. Affinity Photo is another software that is very inexpensive. I think it's about $40. In the grand scheme of things, it's inexpensive. I mean, versus $20 a month for Lightroom and Photoshop, and about $20 a month for Capture One. But if you invest in Affinity Photo, you get a lot of the same flexibility, a lot of the same features that you get in Photoshop, and it works just as well with raw files. For some reason, it's taken forever to load. But it works just as well with your raw files, with your TIFFs, with your JPEGs, or whichever files that you're working with. And the layout is similar. The difference is, some of the tools are named differently and they have, different locations. But, it doesn't take long for you to figure out how to use these images. And I'm going to show you something here really quick. One of the advantages to Affinity Photo is that it has its own built-in frequency separation. So you can just go up here. Where is it? I have to find it. I can't remember which one of the, oh, that's why I'm not seeing it. So if we go to, I know it's in here. And of course, because I'm looking for it, I won't find it. But anyway, it has its own frequency separation built into it. And it's a very simple way of using frequency separation. Let's do help. No. Okay, well, I can't find it. But I know it's here. Because on the iPad, I use it on the iPad all the time. It's on the presets. Nope. And it's probably right in front of me and I just don't see it. But I'm just saying that it is available to you. So like I said, a lot of the same tools that you have in Photoshop is here in Affinity Photo, as well as it has its own little modules, so for dealing with RAW. So like right now, this is under RAW. That's probably why I'm not seeing it. So I'm just going to hit develop. That's why I'm not seeing it. So now it's bringing it in as a regular image. So now I should be able to go up here and filters. There it is, frequency separation. So if we click on frequency separation, it'll automatically separate the high layer from the low layer. And then you can come in here and just determine what your radius is, what you want your radius to be for that image. And then also you have the choice of different processing modes, from bilateral or medium or Gaussian blur. It just depends on which one you feel more comfortable with. And you would just hit apply and it'll create the two layers. And then you would just go in and, start, on your high layer, removing any imperfections on the texture, and the low layer, you know, you go in and start cleaning up the color and things like that. So it would give you all those same features. So like I said, you know, this is a, I'm not gonna say it's a cheap version, because it is a very powerful tool. It has, like I said, a lot of the same features that Photoshop has. So if it's something that may be an option for you, you know, you may want to take a look at that as well. All right, guys, so I'm going to bring this live to an end because I'm going to be live later on Twitch. So if you guys have the time and you're free, you know, pop over to Twitch. The link will be on the page in the bio, on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere I post is the link. I'm trying to build the numbers up on Twitch. So if you get a chance, you know, pop over to Twitch tonight and hang out with me. Probably about, I don't know, maybe about 8 o'clock I'll be live on Twitch, and, you know, we'll just kind of hang out and talk and see what's popping, right? What's up, Russell? All right, so I will catch you guys a little bit later tonight, live on Twitch. Stay safe, wash your hands, take care of your loved ones, and create something amazing. All right, I'm out.